reviewing both films. So, with that being said, we're going to talk about Pumpkinhead first, and then jump into The Howling afterwards. So we hope you enjoy this. And I know this may seem strange because it's just me on the show tonight. I hope it's sounding okay to you guys. So far, I've never done this before. It's the first time for me. So I hope you guys are still going to tune in and listen to what I have to say. So, our first main focus for this episode is Pumpkinhead. It's rated R. It's from 1988. It's definitely a monster flick, and it's got a 65 on Rotten. It was written by Mark Patrick Carducci and Gary Garani, directed by the wonderful Stan Winston, starring Lance Henriksen, Matthew Hurley, Cynthia Bain, Jeff East, John D'Aquino, Carrie Remsen, Florence Scheffler, Joel Hoffman, Tom Woodruff Jr., George Buck Flower, and Natalia Marie. After witnessing the legend of Pumpkinhead as a young boy in the late 50s, Ed Harley seeks out the revenge demon many years later after his family is harmed by a group of young city youths. Pumpkinhead is in many ways a prime example of a cult film. It was adapted from a poem by Ed Justin and happens to be the only directing effort from the talented special effects wizard Stan Winston. Although Stan passed away in 2008 at the age of 62, he had achieved much success throughout his effects and makeup career, with some major highlights being Aliens, Jurassic Park, Terminator 2 Judgment Day, The Thing, and Edward Scissorhands. However, his directorial debut didn't fare so well upon its release, with Pumpkinhead only pulling in about $4.5 million against a $3 million budget. However, it seems that over the years, the 80s creature feature has grown quite the loyal following, with a direct-to-video sequel, comic book run, video game, and 2 contemporary made-for-TV films in its wake. It seems the spirit of vengeance continues to thrive through many of our subconscious thoughts, although the demon itself is a bit more obscure than, let's say, the Gremlins, Critters, or even Predator, but the subject and execution of the film should sit proudly beside any of these properties because it's a pretty damn entertaining fast roller coaster ride of a horror film. The story itself manages to build up a very intense and simplistic gothic lore with its southern style setting. Lance Henriksen as Ed Harley definitely helped save the family with his underrated acting chops that really helped to drive home the story, as his fatherhood is suddenly demolished after a group of young city tourists decide to go dirt biking near his mom and pop style grocery store. Ed leaves his son Billy to tend to the shop. When he goes on a quick errand, soon trouble arises from the family when the family dog Gypsy runs outside towards the outsiders and their dirt bikes. Tragedy unfolds as one of the bikers hits Billy, knocking him to the floor, with the child clearly hurt and unable to move. Joel realizes he's already on probation and can't afford to be involved in another incident, so he forces the group to flee with him, leaving only Steve to look after the boy. Soon Billy's father returns and justifiably freaks out on Steve. Now, at this point in the film, you have to wonder why. I know they do, when they hit the boy, they say don't touch him. But it seems kind of strange to me that Steve staying behind, like, why wouldn't he try to take the kid to the hospital or to some kind of doctor, right? And then Ed does the same thing where he immediately leaves, but they don't try to seek any kind of medical attention. Now, I'm not sure if that's supposed to be like they're so far out in the boonies that they don't really believe in modern medicine like that or not. I guess you could chalk it up to something like that. But that doesn't really answer the questions as far as why is Steve acting like an idiot. He thinks he cares so much, but you didn't really do everything in your power it was that you could have done. At least in my opinion there. And then going back to Ed, Harley, he takes his son back, and they go just back to the house, and Billy passes away in his arms. But again, the kid could have had some internal hemorrhaging, internal bleeding, what have you. Things that obviously he has some cuts and scrapes, but you don't see any really bad damage to him on the outside. So it was clear that there was something happening, more happening to him, right? So still really strange that his fate is just kind of accepted as they go home. But hey, the movie has to continue. So needless to say, the boy dies, and this sends Ed into the mountains to find an old witch figure that goes by the name of Haggis. After Ed is able to figure out her location, he is saddened by the news that she is unable to raise the dead the way he had hoped for. Haggis is quick to see what is now on Ed's mind, and that is revenge. Haggis does make it clear that going down this road will not end well for him, but he still blindly agrees to become the summoner for the infamous Pumpkinhead. After participating in what feels like a blood pact, Ed starts to lose control over his regular motor functions at certain times. He is now linked with the demon creature, who will stop at nothing to kill all the tourists involved in Billy's accident. Joel begins to have a change of heart and agrees to turn himself into the police, but Pumpkinhead has already arrived at their cabin. Ed realizes what he has done is wrong and tries to call off the deal with Haggis. However, this is now impossible, as Ed and the demon are now bonded. Ed vows to stop the violence by interfering in the attack. After Joel is killed off, only Tracy and Chris remain and are able to receive help from a native boy named Bunt. This is where we get a bit of the mythos behind the demon and why the community is so unwilling to help those who have been targeted or marked, as the film likes to use. This is because trying to stop the demon in any way will put you in the crosshairs of death as well, which means if you interfere with Pumpkinhead's business, his vigilantism, if you will, you become marked yourself. So in essence, a Bunt, this native boy, has pretty much marked himself trying to help out, which is insane if you see the movie. So this brings us to the conclusion where Ed figures out that the demon and himself are slowly switching places, but in essence they are one. So just like in Fight Club, Ed makes the hard choice to kill himself to save the others from a grueling death. Something that takes a couple tries before it is really finished. We end with Haggis back in the Pumpkin Patch Cemetery, bearing the remains to what we think is of Pumpkinhead, but in actuality it is revealed that it's Ed, as we see the necklace given to him by his son at the beginning of the film. Pumpkinhead is a rad 80s film that brings a fun nostalgic energy while ultimately going against the grain of the popular revenge trope of the 80s. It takes a while for us to really see Pumpkinhead in action, but the build-up really works, and it makes the payoff worth it in the long run. Great set design with killer effects makes this worthy of a revisit, and it is now also streaming on the AMC Plus app. So please, if you've never seen Pumpkinhead and you are listening to this, I hope even though I spoiled some things, I hope I kind of convinced you to go back and give this a watch. I know I did mention that there are several sequels. I think this one is the only one that you really need to check out. The only, like a negative about this one would just some of the editing is kind of hokey. And even that kind of plays into its, there's certain, once you get about halfway into the film kind of becomes this self-aware, campy kind of monster tale that plays around like in the area of like a darker kind of fairy tale tone. So if you're able to get in that mindset, it's a very kind of fun film, and it feels of its time. It feels authentic. It's very fun. A lot of great kills. I know I glossed over a lot of the kills in my summary of the film and whatnot, but a lot of good gore. A lot of good special effects, of course, coming from Stan Winston, even though he kind of stepped aside to fine-tune the story and let another team take over the special effects, which is interesting because if you look at how when Pumpkinhead is first summoned, right, he looks very similar to, at least his head structure, to the Xenomorph, which is pretty interesting when you think about it, where the origins come from. And then, of course, I really, really like the fact that they had Haggis, the kind of witch figure, as the gatekeeper of everything, because it just brings this kind of eeriness to the whole premise, right? How Ed Harley is very kind of blinded by, he's seeing red, you know. All he knows is that these kids, they killed his boy, and you know, it was the only, besides his dog Gypsy, it was the only family he had left. His wife had already passed away, something that they mentioned, but I don't think that they really say how. Because he goes to visit, he goes to visit the wife and the grave when he's about to bury his son's body, right next to the wife, and you can just tell that he's super enraged. And what's insane to me is that it seems that he's more upset that all of these people, they hit, his son, and then they left him. Even though Steve stays, he doesn't really do what he could have done to perhaps save the boy, right? And everybody else runs away. And then Ed, throughout the film, when he's explaining what happened to his son, he keeps saying they ran him over and they left him, as if he is more upset that there was this accident that happened and they chose to leave and protect themselves rather than this young innocent kid. And it's funny, they set up these kids as these snot-nosed kind of touristy brats right from the get-go, where they get to Harley and Sons grocery store in the beginning of the film, when we're introduced to all the main outsiders, I guess you would call them. And they get out of the car, and then they see Billy, the son, and one of the dudes is quick to make a comment on his glasses, like, "Oh, look at that kid's glasses, like Coke bottles, what?" And that's supposed to kind of set the tone for how us, at least in my opinion, how us as viewers are supposed to see these kids. They're not great people. They're probably spoiled. They have all this expensive equipment. Joel, the one who actually is personally responsible for the incident, admits that he hit the kid because he had been drinking all day and is impaired, and has already had, if not one or more incidences like this already happen, which causes him to flee and take everybody with him in the first place. So it's clear to me in the story that it's just supposed to show the naivety of